Hey guys, today we're going to be showing you how to paint black Space Marine armor, and we're going to demonstrate that on Shrike, the chapter master of the Raven Guard. So we're going to be starting with the airbrush today, and then we're going to be moving on to the brush. The first color we're going to be using is Raven Black from Minotaur. We're laying this on with the airbrush in a kind of zenithal style highlight, meaning we're going to come in from a downwards angle. We're going to spray in onto the model kind of in this direction here to establish a natural value structure. We're going to have like the brighter areas of the armor towards the tops of the shapes where the white is naturally highlighting those areas. And we're going to use the airbrush to help accomplish that pretty quickly here. Got my Raven Black from Minotaur loaded in the airbrush. This is a pretty dark gray. It's going to give us a nice subtle highlight here. So black armor can be a little bit tricky sometimes. You want to be careful not to make it too gray, because then it'll start looking gray instead of black. So you want to make sure your highlights with the airbrush are really subtle. That's why we're using a nice dark gray like the coal from Minotaur. And that's about as bright as we're going to go with the highlights with the airbrush. We're going to come back in with the brush to do some line highlights on the armor. But before that, we're going to finish off our airbrushing steps on this model. Next color I'm going to use is dark brown from Vallejo Model Air. This is a really kind of desaturated dark brown color. We're going to be spraying this kind of up into the recesses coming from the opposite angle that we did in our previous step. And we're going to be focusing towards like the ruins that he's standing on, trying to simulate that dirt. A little bit of a weathered look here. Okay, so I've got the dark brown from Vallejo Model Air loaded in my airbrush. And I'm gonna very subtly spray it in a upwards angle. Focusing more towards the bottom of the model. And now we're gonna come in and focus even more towards the base of the ruins here to simulate that dirt buildup. The next color we're going to be using is Iron Hole Gray from P3. This is a much brighter gray than the coal was, and we're not going to be using this on the armor itself. We're actually going to be spraying this with the airbrush onto the ruins that he's standing on. So we have the Iron Hole Gray loaded up in our airbrush here, and now we're going to spray this in a downwards angle onto the ruins that he's standing on. Okay guys, we're going to do one last step with the airbrush here. I'm just going to lay in some base colors for his skin tone on the little bit of his face that's exposed there. I like doing this with the airbrush whenever I can get away with it, because the airbrush gives us that really smooth coat of paint. Works really nicely for skin. And he's only got a little bit of exposed skin on the front of his face there, but we can just knock that out real quick with the airbrush. Paint I'm going to be using for this step is Rin Flesh from P3. I've got this loaded up into my airbrush. And so I'm going to turn my PSI down now on my airbrush. So far I've been working at about 40 PSI. I like to do that when I'm laying in all my base colors. We get a really nice smooth application of the glazes that way. But for this step I'm going to turn it down to about 30. Coming very close now to his face and just very carefully lay in this color. It's alright if we get any kind of overspray onto the surrounding materials around his face there. We're going to be coming back in with other colors with the brush to pick those details out and fix that overspray, so it's not an issue. Last step with the airbrush, guys. This is Rin Flesh from P3. We're going to send this through the airbrush, just a very small amount in a downwards angle onto the face, just to highlight that skin we just laid in there with the Kardic flesh. Alright guys, so that's the last step with the airbrush, so now we're going to move on to the hand brush.